Greetings, friends. I am legitimately excited to share today's commentary. Why am I excited, you ask? Well, I'm excited because Maurice has gotten into the stuff that made me become fascinated with the fourth way in the first place when I was, I don't know exactly how old I was, sometime in high school. Not only was it the time that got me attracted to the fourth way, but it was the time that got me attracted to spiritual quest in general. Now that I've gotten a little older, I look back and I realize how maybe kind of odd that is. It seemed perfectly natural at the time, but now that I've gotten older and I've known many people who've lived many different kinds of lives, I've lived a very varied existence, gotten to know people from all stripes of human existence. And I realized it's actually kind of an odd thing for a teenager. I think I was 15 or 16 to glom on to something like that and to find such an instinctive fascination with it. It's kind of odd. But anyway, so the thing that I've always loved about the fourth way is that in addition to the really deep, profound stuff, the really heavy stuff about like the nature of the universe and achieving life after death and all of this stuff, there's also a really practical core to it, which has always appealed to me. I love that the fourth way does not look at life as something to shy away from or as an impediment to our spiritual development. It looks at life as part of our development and at our being effective at life as being important and morally sound, right? You're not supposed to hide from your responsibilities. We are supposed to be the most effective, best functioning people that we can be in society. So anyway, that really appeals to me. And that's what Maurice gets into in the commentary that I want to discuss today. Now, before he gets into that, and I'm going to read a passage directly from the commentary, he also makes some interesting observations about how we perceive our own lives. And what I mean by that is he's writing a letter to this fellow, and he says in the letter that when you talk about your life, when somebody asks you about your life, we tend to automatically think of events, right? Like somebody will say, "Oh, well, what was your life like in your early 20s?" And you're going to say what careers you started, what women or men you were dating, maybe getting married. Like you're going to go over your events. But Nicole makes a very interesting point, which is that our life story is really a story of inner states as much as it is events, perhaps more so. And the reason why this is relevant, besides the obvious reason, is because our inner states do not always mirror our external states. And that's the big point that Nicole is making. What he's saying is you can look back at a time 20 years ago and say, oh, that was the time that my career really started to take off and I was doing really well. Or that was the time that I backpacked around Europe or whatever it is. But that neglects the fact that your inner state could have been completely incongruous with the events. Right? Because when you say something like that, say, I backpacked around Europe, that's exciting, it's cool, or that's when my career really took off. Well, that's cool, that's exciting. But the fact is, you might have been miserable when those things happened, right? Or vice versa. There could be times you say, oh, that was a really rough time in my life. But if you were to actually think back to it, maybe you would remember that your inner state was actually one of your best inner states. Inner states, not interstates like highway system, inner states, right? And so he talks about the incongruity between those two things and how it's not accurate to think of life or our lives as a series of events only. Life and our lives are a series of events, but also a series of states. And so then Nicole uses that to begin discussing the importance of mastering your states, meaning that we should be able to decide consciously to meet each event with the proper state, with whatever the best state would be to meet that event, right? And if there is incongruity in it, and this is in the most simple, like get away from all the really heavy esoteric spiritual stuff, in the most simple aspects, This is just down and dirty, useful stuff. Because it is true that we go through life feeling things that are often incongruous. We're not lined up with the events in our lives. And so we work very hard on perfecting the events and bringing in the best events that we can in our lives. But who cares if your inner state still sucks? If you're still unhappy, if you're still angry? What does it matter? The state that you're in means just as much, really more than the event, right? And so then Nicole is talking about the importance of mastering our conscious control over our inner states, which is achieved through self-observation, right? And this is when he's getting into the whole idea of self-observation. And I'm going to read this section in which he discusses what that means, because the concept of self-observation is kind of a core to the fourth way. And let me just reiterate, as I've been trying to do through every one of these talks, I am not a fourth way guru. I'm not a fourth way teacher. I don't even consider myself really a fourth way devotee, even though I have studied the fourth way for a long time. I study all kinds of spiritual traditions. This is just one of them. I am not trying to pass myself off as a spiritual guru of any kind, much less a fourth way guru. I'm just a guy who really likes trying to figure out this world, and even more than that, wants to be the best person that he can be. And in this channel, I like to share the things that I learn along the way. It helps me, and I hope that it helps the people that are listening. So that's just a caveat I want to throw in, because there's all kinds of these, there's all these fake-ass social media gurus popping up all over the place. I don't want to be one, and I don't want to get sucked into the ego trap where I can start to convince myself I am one, because I'm not. So, all right, that out of the way. Let's come back to Maurice Nicole. Nicole knew what he was talking about. I am no Maurice Nicole. Here is Maurice Nicole after he has discussed this discrepancy between our inner states and the events of our lives. He then goes into this passage. And this really gets to the meat of what I love in the fourth way. So, this is Nicole writing. Now, in self-observation, try to distinguish between outer events and inner states, and notice where you are standing both in relation to your inner state and to the nature of the outer event. Outer events are of any kind. Outer life is not a smooth sheet of paper that we are crawling over like ants. It is full of hills and valleys, of good weather and bad weather. This is the nature of life, but as a rule, all events we take as exceptional, or at least unpleasant ones, such as illness, war, etc. Life is a series of different events coming along on larger and smaller scales to meet you. And each event has its special nature. And inner states are again of every kind. All personal work is about inner states. And you have all heard of what wrong states one must work on and try not to identify with. Now, when Nicole talks about identify with, in this system, I think this just is human nature. This is reality. The fourth way has its own terms for it, but I think this adds up to what reality actually is. We go through life, we reach a stimulus of some kind, and then we have a programmed mechanical script that arises in us in response to that stimulus, right? And so the key is to be able to find the gap between when that mechanical stimulus arises and when you begin to identify with it. And this is me talking, not Nicole. I'm trying to explain one of the terms he used for people who might not be familiar at all with the fourth way. So that's what he means when he talks about identifying with your state, right? The state arises, but the state isn't you. You choose to. And usually this happens so fast for most of us, but the whole goal is to practice and observe yourself and work on these things until there's a space between the stimulus and your response to the stimulus. And in that space, you can choose to not identify with the stimulus, and you can choose to consciously enforce a different state on it. That is the most mundane goal, as Nicole and Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and Bennett and everybody always said, the end of the fourth way, the end of the work, is not to be a master of life, as in like society and career and everything. That's not the end. But it is part of the journey, mastering yourself in this life right now. The person sitting there right now listening to this, the person sitting there who gets pissed off when their favorite team loses a game, the person who gets hurt when they hear somebody call them ugly behind their back, like that person needs to, you don't need to do anything, but that person can choose to find inner freedom by observing themselves, studying themselves, finding the gap in between the response, or in between the stimulus and the response, and then consciously choosing to enforce a different state. Don't identify with the mechanical response. All right? Sorry for that long aside, but that's what he means when he talks about identify with. All right. Back to Nicole. This is back to Maurice talking. If you work on these wrong states and try to separate yourselves from them, then the unpleasant events of life will not catch you, as it were, so easily and draw force from you. Events are influences changing at every moment in their various combinations, and some are better than others. But all have to be taken consciously, even good ones. At this low level, where we are in the universe, namely on the earth, and some of them are very dangerous and must not be identified with at all costs. From what has been said, it will become clearer that one's life is more to be thought of as one's inner states, and a true history of one's life would be a history of one's inner states and negative emotions especially. To live anyhow in oneself, in this internal vast world accessible only to each person through individual self-observation and always invisible to others, is the worst crime we can commit. So this work begins with self-observation and noticing wrong states in oneself and working against them. In this way, the inner life becomes purified, and since our inner life attracts our outer life, there's one, that's a good little tidbit there. That was me talking back to Maurice. By changing our inner states, starving some and nourishing others, we also alter not only our relation to events coming from outside, but even the nature of the events that come to us day by day. Only in this way can we change the nature of events that happen to us. We cannot change them directly, but only through changing states. That is, through beginning to put this disorderly house we live in into some order. The other was an incorrect insertion on my part. It is not the events of today that happen to you that matter, such as that you lost something or something went wrong, or someone forgot you or spoke to you harshly, etc., etc., but how you reacted to it all. That is, what states of yourself you were in. For it is here that your real life lies, and if our inner states were right, nothing in the nature of external states could overcome us. Try, therefore, to distinguish, as an exercise in living more consciously, between inner states and outer events, and try to meet any outer event, after noticing its nature, with the right inner attitude, that is, with the right state. And if you cannot, think afterwards about it. First, try to define the nature of the event, and notice if this kind of event often comes to you, and try to see it more clearly in terms such as, this is called being late, or this is called losing things, or this is called receiving bad news, or this is called unpleasant surprises, or this is called hard work, or this is called being ill. Begin in this very simple way, and you will soon see how different personal events, and so how in this respect one's outer life. Begin in this very simple way, and you will soon see how different personal events, and so how in this respect one's outer life, are changing all the time. And what you could not do at one moment, you can do at another. For events, as it were, are like the opening and shutting of doors. Then you will be able to see, in regard to the small events of daily life, what events are partly due to your own cause, and what are accidental, and so on. And then think about your state, and with what state you usually meet some rather typical event, and whether the state is, as it were, the right tool to use, the right ticket to offer, the right method to employ for that event. Towards very many events, one has to learn to be passive, i.e., not react at all, not do anything. But to be passive demands a great interactivity of consciousness to prevent any mechanical reaction taking place when the event, coming in as a mechanical impression, touches the purely associative machinery of mind and feeling which we mistakenly take as ourselves. I want to read that one more time because it's really important to understanding. And I'm going to jump into something. All right. So, but to be passive demands a great interactivity of consciousness to prevent any mechanical reaction taking place when the event, coming in as a mechanical impression, touches the purely associative machinery of mind and feeling, which we mistakenly take as ourselves. That's it, that last part. These scripts that run in our brains, in our souls, they're not us, man. Like, if any of you out there are familiar at all with programming, like even mildly, you know how you write certain scripts into the code so that, well, say somebody's on your webpage, when they do a certain thing, it initiates a script. And that script is always there back in the code, right? And so I'm not the person who is real fond of likening reality exactly to a computer simulation. You've all heard of simulation theory, simulation hypothesis, whatever. But I do think there are useful things in it for conceptualizing a lot of this stuff. And one of them, I believe, is looking at those scripts, right? Like looking at a piece of JavaScript or something and thinking of your mind that way, because I think that's how it actually is, right? And that's, I mean, Nicole, they refer to it as machinery, as machines, because that was the technology of their time. That was the limits to what they knew. Well, computers are now our most advanced machines, or among our most advanced machines. And so we have different metaphors and different analogies that we can use. And so I like to think of a lot of our recurring thoughts as computer scripts, because I think that's how it actually works. And what I mean is, going through life, you develop a certain way to deal with certain kinds of stimulus, right? So if somebody flatters you, you revert to your "I just got flattered" script. If somebody insults you, you revert to your "I just got insulted" script. And that is the mechanicalness of life that Nicole was talking about all the way back in the day. Great, it's all kinds of spiritual and philosophical thinkers have been discussing this, but right now we're talking specifically about the great Maurice Nicole. And so, yeah, it's this machinery, and unless we learn to see the scripts at play in ourselves, and unless we can get to the point where we can find that gap between the script and the response, or between the stimulus and the scripted response, then we are basically doomed to be robotic to the very end of our days. That's the whole point. Like to me, the whole spiritual quest is embodied in the quest of the fourth way, which is the quest for freedom from our mechanicalness. Now, obviously, there's a little more to it than that, because I'm not a narcissist, and I do believe that we have social responsibilities, and that we are here to help our fellow human beings to at least some extent. But within that, we can fulfill those obligations from a place of freedom. We don't have to fulfill them from the prison of mechanicalness. But anyway, these are just my thoughts. I think that was a great commentary by Maurice Nicole, and I was excited to read it, and it's making me excited to keep diving more into the commentaries. All right, peace out, everybody.